Welcome to Stoughton Spotlight. I'm your host, Jeffrey Pickette. On this episode, I'm joined by Fred Yaitanes, a well-known real estate agent in Stoughton, and his son, Greg Yaitanes, who's an Emmy Award winning director and has directed shows like Grey's Anatomy, Lost, and House, and just finished wrapping up the fourth and final season of his hit show on Cinemax, Banshee. So, Greg and Fred, thank you so much for joining me here today to discuss your career and hopefully some advice for aspiring filmmakers. And so I will start with just kind of getting into a little bit about your career. I gave a brief introduction, but some of the projects that you've worked on.
Well, I came up through television, and what's been exciting is being in what keeps being referred to as a golden age of television. I mean, television's gotten very good. Movie actors are migrating to television. I've been in television as a way to tell stories since its very beginning, so I've watched its evolution. So you've touched on the major shows. I mean, I won the Emmy for House. I also produced the show for the last 4 seasons. It was a very slow journey through television because it's one of those things that you advance slowly by doing, and word of mouth. Not dissimilar to my dad and I were talking on the way over just about the referral business that we're in terms of keeping those relationships and chasing those leads. That was always a part of episodic because as the business has grown, as you're seeing now, Netflix and Amazon and these other outlets are all creating content. It's been an exciting time because I've been in a growth industry since I've started.
And it's interesting, as you started your career working with the Foxes and ABCs and the network television stations, and now you're working with Banshee with Cinemax.
Yeah.
And so you're on the cable side of things. And the differences between making shows for those two different, very different
Well, I
platforms.
actually started in syndicated TV, which doesn't exist anymore. Mm-hmm. Which was there used to be 70 plus companies that made television and sold it to networks. It was prior to Clinton. A network could not own its own studio to make television. It couldn't sell to itself, and Clinton deregulated that, and then all the studios that promised they wouldn't forced out every other company. So there's now only the networks that own studios are producing television. There's nobody, with exception of Sony, outside of actually owning a station. Mm-hmm. So what ended up happening was it just started creating an enormous amount of repetition in the business. So you're often hitting these redundancies of notes and jobs and so forth, and it became a very bogged down process. And then House was kind of a retreat for that because I had creative control on a hit show. And then jumping over to pay cable was really the next natural step because it's very artist friendly, which is really what I was looking for.
And the length of your shows as well, you have an hour-long show on Cinemax, and it'll take up 55 minutes of that hour-long block, no commercials, whereas half an hour sitcom or comedy or drama on network will 18-20 minutes.
Yeah, well, you end up, I mean, a half-hour sitcom is about 22 minutes. You're making, it was feeling more and more we were making the stuff between commercials, and it was an enormously frustrating format to work in. They were adding more commercial breaks. They're chasing advertising, understandably because they're an ad-based model, and, I mean, there was, which has recently come under continued attack as a model to begin with. So as that desperation continues to gain more advertising, you're selling more time of your show. So I was just watching the hour just every year I was working in television keep getting diminished. I mean, at the time of House, we were at 42 minutes of actual story of an hour, which means that people are watching an enormous amount of commercials, and you had to work in very specific parameters of commercial breaks. So you could only tell, you had to tell 13 minutes, then you had to have a 6 minute, then you had to have a 3 minutes. So sometimes you'd come on for shorter than the actual commercial breaks. And so going over to pay cable where it doesn't have to be a set length and you're just telling the best story you can tell, again, felt more like how I started in terms of being in the business.
And Fred, Greg is here visiting from, you've been on the set of Quarry new show that you're working on, and you're based in California.
Yes.
So Greg's here visiting, and just talk to me about kind of giving you a chance to boast a little bit. Seeing what your son has accomplished, and what he's been able to do.
Wow, interesting question, Jeff. Thank you. Well, it's been wonderful to be part of such a amazing career, and remembering the early stages of his years at University of Southern California Film School, and then breaking into the industry, and how long it took him to find it, because he did it all the hard way. This is a guy that has been tremendous drive, and I love the fact that he's relentless about his, pursuing his career, and no was not an option, and he just simply did it all the hard way. He didn't go out there with contacts, and I've always admired that. So it's been wonderful to be watching him even from a distance, to be able to see his success. And I remember, he finally at about 27 and a half, I think was about somewhere around the age of 27 when he finally had made it in the industry. And I've just been watching the wonderful rise since. And I remember, just as a quick aside here, to be the proud father, I remember him calling me the day after the nominations for the Emmy came out, and he said, "Dad, guess what? I've been nominated for an Emmy." He said, "Every year I look to see how many of the people I know are nominated, and there's my name." And I said, "What do you think?" He said, "I have no chance at this." He said, "These guys have all been nominated multiple times. Some have won." He says, "I'm just going to enjoy the ride." And of course, we're all elated, and all my friends and family all over the country are all excited, because we watch the Emmys for all these years and you never see anybody that you know. And now all of a sudden, I'm going to expect that my son's going to be on the show. So we remember again, the family all over the country, the friends all over the country watching the Emmys that night, and then they announce, and the winner is Greg Yaitanes, and I go, "Oh my God, that's my son!" And then the phone started ringing. The phone rang until 1 o'clock in the morning. It was just an amazing thing. So anyway, it's been wonderful to be part of Greg's career, and to watch him do what he loves to do. And I remember, one quick aside too, watching him, talking with him when he was doing a mini series, and I think this one might have been in Prague or Rome. And I said, he was telling me his schedule, and he was working 18 hours a day, and then he would have meetings after that. And I said, "Greg, just make sure you take care of yourself, get some rest, get to the gym." He said, "Dad, don't worry about me. Every day I go to work, I go to relax. I could never imagine myself doing anything else. I'm living my dream." And it was just so, heartwarming for me to see that my son is doing something that he loves to do. And I just remember that vividly, because it was and then an interesting thing too, at the end of the miniseries, he sent me a photo of the cast and crew, and this is the way he said to me. He says, "Dad, look into their eyes. You can see how exhausted they were after 100 days of shooting." He said, "Look into mine. I could have gone another 100 days.
Yeah, you always feel like you can, because every day your office changes. I mean, I was just coming out of working in New Orleans, and we're outside and we're battling the elements, but we're making something. At the end of every day, there's something more than when we started, and that's a very invigorating, especially now. I've migrated into directing the entirety of a season of television. So Quarry's, I did all 8 episodes of Quarry, and it was a phenomenal experience of being able to be with a crew. And I hadn't worked in the States that long on something. I'd worked on a long miniseries in Prague and another one in Rome, and it has that feeling that you're just you're with this community of artists, and you're every day trying to tackle something brand new. So the ever changing. I wouldn't have done well in an office. Interestingly, I started. Going back even further, I started in public access. So I used to intern at cable. Most people don't remember, but cable had to come to your town, and at the time it was in Newton, and I would go over as I saw a camcorder when I was 14, and just felt connected instantly to what it was, and convinced my dad to get us a VCR and get us a camera to go with it, and then that segued into being able to volunteer over in Newton at the public access station there, and then cable came to Wellesley, and they opened up at Babson. They opened up the public access studio, and I started interning there all through high school. So that was the very, very beginning, and that hobby became what I did go to film school, but I still had a backup. I had a minor in psychology in case it didn't go my way. So the minor in psychology has helped me immensely on set, but it's it was without contacts and getting out and trying to make a name for myself, which was slow and steady. I worked, but it was around what my dad's saying, it was around like my late 20s that things cracked. Like it was always like a job a year, then 2 jobs a year, then 3 jobs, and eventually it all cracked around my late 20s, and then I started to work pretty consistently.
And so you just kind of talk to me about that feeling of, I mean, obviously now, fair to say you have had a lot of success in the industry, but those years where you're working up towards getting your break,
right?
What keeps you, I guess what can keep you up, and when things are getting down, when it looks like the break might not come, what kind of keeps you motivated or kept you motivated during that phase before you had really
I think there was, I've noticed that there is a shift now to young people coming up. There's a more of a sense of, well, I just want to go over there. Like I already want to be at that, or how come I'm not already at this level of success? I don't, I run across it quite a bit to where I notice it when people are working, they don't want to go that extra mile. They don't want to push that extra bit. And growing up and doing jobs, I was talking about just even the weather today here, because I used to landscape on the summers, and it was be backbreaking work, but it taught me an honest day's work of hard work. Worked in a deli, worked in a fish market, did all this stuff growing up here, and having a hard day's work behind you just taught you that patience and that perseverance, and also like, what am I, how can I keep maneuvering my game to get to where I'm going versus just feeling entitled that I can kind of get to it. So it was, you always take it, I took each thing as a learning experience. So if I didn't crack that job, or I got close on it, I'm like, all right, well, I'm that much closer. And very, fortunately, whether it was my brother sometimes or my dad or anybody, just having that little extra boost of cash every once in a while helped, because you're just I started getting to the point where I started feeling good is when I started getting jobs that would get me to the next job in terms of being able to support myself. LA is tough, can spit you out pretty quick. And
I mean, was there ever a time where you felt, I'm gonna go and lean on that psychology degree, or
No, I felt good because the right things. I had a lot of confidence in my work. I felt good about the feedback I was getting. If I looked back on it then, I think it would have. I had different choices in front of me, but I felt television was. I actually broke pretty early. I made a short film in school. That I had raised money locally and also from my family, that really was my first break. So I got a movie deal very quickly, but movies take a very long time and don't often happen. So it was the dream became very real, that what people end up really seeing of people is success. They don't see all the disappointment and failure and heartbreak that goes behind it. So I had a movie deal, but no movie was happening. It wasn't like, oh, here's your movie deal and you go off and you're on set the next day. It was a lot. I learned quickly that the studio politics and the way projects go forward and what decides to move is a whole other animal I never was taught or learned. And I got into television because I was realizing on my cable box that every day more channels were showing up, and had a feeling that more content would be needed and content would really become the commodity. And so I wanted to be in a content growth industry, which is why I moved over to television. And it just there was just such a need. And when you can do it, when you can successfully deliver an episode of television, it got you another episode of television. So that just kept building. And then I often worked on shows that got canceled, and so all the people would disband, and then I had 3 people on 3 different shows that had a good experience with me now. And then those shows got canceled.
All about networking.
Well, it just kept, it was the exponential growth of failed shows, actually. Like there was all these things because there were so many people making genre-based programming back then.
Well, I want to touch upon the show that you're working on right now. It's a personal favorite of mine, Banshee on Cinemax. And for those who haven't seen the show, you definitely should check it out. Give me a brief synopsis about Sheriff Hood and a little bit about his background in the show itself.
Banshee takes place in a fictional town in Pennsylvania, and Lucas Hood is an ex-con that is returning to, or follows the leads to find his lost love from 15 years ago, tracks her down to the small town of Banshee, Pennsylvania, and through a series of circumstances assumes the identity of the local sheriff named Lucas Hood. They collide before they both of them arrive into the town, and he takes on his identity. So he is a sheriff that is also committing crimes and often having to be, investigating his own handiwork in the first season. And that starts building as you see the cast of characters that we start building around the town. Kai Proctor, former Amish, who's now the gangster of the town. So it's a very pulp, kind of heightened, stylized world. One of the writers of season 2 said, these are real toads in an imaginary pond. So the human relationships are very relatable. The characters and just the world that they're in is particularly crazy. No town would exist like Banshee without being on the cover of every magazine of the kind of corruption and craziness that goes on week to week. But it follows the show pretty much in real time. So actually, like, you're watching the show from a couple of years ago. We started it in 2012, but the show itself hasn't advanced very far. Season 4 will make a bit of a jump in terms of our storytelling time.
And it's pretty interesting. Before we get to season 4, there's almost 2 timelines in the show. The show is constantly jumping back to the past of Lucas Hood, the main character, and the past of the other characters as well. And so, from your standpoint, how difficult is that to kind of maintain 2 storylines that they run simultaneously throughout the course of each episode?
It actually, it wasn't very hard because the characters were often referencing this past life that they had, that there was this thing that happened 15 years ago, and that's how the whole Banshee Origins web component to the series began, because we kept saying, it'd be really cool to see that scene of her when she went to prison but didn't go inside, and why didn't she go in that day? So we went and started shooting these little vignettes of backstories of the characters, which then locked on what happened and what took place during that time. So then it wasn't something that was just inside the actor's head or the writer's head. You actually had a physical version of what the backstory was, which we, in the 3rd season, assembled all those pieces of backstory into an additional episode that's only you can find on YouTube.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that is the approach of, it's not just a television show. You can interact with the cast on Twitter as the show is happening live when it debuts, that Friday night.
Right.
And you could also, as you mentioned, go on and see Banshee Origins and get more of the backstory. Yeah. So discuss a little bit about that component of the extra beyond just what you're seeing on your TV screen.
Well, we came on, I got the job in 2011, and the way that cable works is that the season of Banshee just finished shooting right now, but it won't air until January. So I had to imagine that in 2016, the 4th season of the show might be airing, and where will TV be going? So it was of that philosophy. You don't throw the football where the player is, you throw it where he's going, and that's where we tried to advance, like, where multi-platform storytelling may be going. We felt the show needed to be social at its DNA, so I recruited only actors that were going to be game to do those live tweets and to be available for that and to interact and to make the show a social event, because it really, we're only limited by the subscribership of Cinemax. Those are the only people that are going to be able to see the show. So we had to get the word out in every way possible to kind of build growth for the network in terms of subscribers, because the model of pay cable is, you're in a business model. You have to make your product for a certain amount. It has to be able to match up to the amount of viewership, for a network like Netflix. They're essentially, their shows are advertising to sell more Netflix. Cinemax is a little bit different. Ratings matter a little bit, but it's mostly the model in which you're working. So all these things were ideas to try to keep the show relevant in the future seasons, because we wanted to make it where, oh wow, okay, that show's coming in on budget, it's there, it's got a following, that's how, and then by doing that, we actually found where our true audience lay, which was that if you see the antiquated system in which TV's, the Nielsen ratings, which is really a system that is now is always 10 years behind what's happening. Like they're just acknowledging DVR watching, but DVR watching is
Years.
people are moving. Yeah, it's
Right.
like now it's about on demand. It's
Right.
about, our social growth was phenomenal, would jump 50% every year. And we would watch that. So we knew more people were watching than what the ratings were actually telling us. And by the cast being available or being there on Friday nights, like it made it a night to stay in.
Right.
We felt that we had to entertain people. And, my brother does the title sequence, and the title sequence had layers of storytelling within that, because when you're coming out of broadcast, as you said, like the hour is so limited. There's no real title sequence in broadcast TV that much anymore. That's 30 seconds of storytelling you may need. So to have a 2-minute title sequence was such an indulgence, and we didn't want to make it something you'd want to fast forward through. So anybody watching Banshee, every episode the title sequence changes. It's different every single week of every single episode. And it also had a social component where there was a combination, and that combination would take you to Welcome to Banshee, and Welcome to Banshee you could put in the combination, unlock further content. So
Right.
we tried to make a show that the deepest diving fan would be interested in watching.
Sure. And Fred, as Greg just mentioned, your other son, Jason, does the title sequence. And so you really have a Yaitanes hour of television on Cinemax. And tell me a little bit about Jason, what he does and is working on.
Well, Greg can probably give you a better indication of that, but I know that he does the opening sequence and the title work in Banshee, and Greg just indicated to me that he also is going to be doing it for Quarry, which I didn't know about, which is kind of nice too. And what I've appreciated about Jason, he, like Greg, has always been creative, always had wonderful imagination. And when Greg and Jason hooked up, and I remember Jason saying to me, he and his business partner were applied for the opening sequence work with Greg and the whole production team. And he called me and he said, "Dad," he says, "we're one of the top 6. He goes, "That is a win for us." And I said, "Well, look, it's not over yet." I said, I think this is going to be good for you." And he really looked, and Greg judged it on Jason's ability to be very imaginative, creative, and very different. There was a completely new approach to opening sequence, and their work was very different, which is obviously why he was hired. And of course, it was hugely successful, which is why, in part, why the show just grabbed people right from the beginning, because it never had been done before.
Submitted it under his company and not his name.
Okay.
So it was, because I genuinely liked it, but also knew that it was just going to come off like I was trying to hire my brother. And so I submitted it with the other title sequences. This is from Tin Punch Media. People didn't even know that. It didn't until there was like an email thread well into the hiring of his company that they realized that there was that connection. So it was nice, because it genuinely was on its own merits, because the network was like, "Oh, this is the concept we love,"
Right.
And it happened to be his, and that it got refined from that original pitch. But it was exciting to see that and actually the other sequence that he didn't use, because he pitched 2 different sequences. The other sequence became the title sequence for Banshee Origins. So
Now, on this table, I have a GoPro Hero3 small camera that you can attach. It, believe it or not, takes HD footage. Gets you can put it on, there's straps you can put it on your head, or clips that you can put it on various places to capture first-person action and real close-up shots you might not be able to get otherwise. And the reason I bring it up is one of my favorite episodes from season 3 of Banshee used a lot of these cameras during a heist scene to capture a lot of the footage. So I was just hoping you could talk a little bit about that scene and what made you decide to film with these type of cameras and give the type of vantage point that it ultimately ended up providing the viewer.
yeah, it was the GoPro is an incredible feat of technology. In fact, we used there's 2 kinds of cameras, and I'll go into that in a second. The idea came about, we were given 100 days to film a 10-episode season of Banshee. So those 100 days, we distribute as needed. So we, last year, the mid-season finale, episode 5, which was the big, assault on Precinct 13-esque episode at the Caddy, required more time. And so you have to give time from another block of episodes in order to meet either the season opener or the season finale. So intentionally, I took the block that would have the least amount of days available to it because I had distributed that to other episodes. So knowing that I could move quickly, but part of the way we were trying to solve the problem was that we had a huge heist sequence that was nearly half the episode. And initially our conversations were, is there a found footage version of this episode that we can approach early on in the process? And then what we landed on was that we could tell the heist in through a more voyeuristic standpoint. And then as we broke that down further, we realized that there was an opportunity to do this full 20-minute sequence entirely. The GoPros were used as these cameras. We didn't identify them as GoPros, but we used them as the cameras that Job was leaving, kind of as a trail of breadcrumbs. What it provided was kind of a master shot of what was happening when we needed it, because we ended up using these Panasonic HPX 500 HD cameras that clip onto your head, and so those were all on the actors' heads, and in order to stay oriented as to who you were looking at, we drop out to the GoPros. So at kind of the height of the sequence, there was 22 cameras working at any given time. There was the 3 cameras on the actors. We would do what's called a Cowboy Switch, which is an old Western term, which is where an actor goes behind something and then the stuntman emerges out the other side. So we would see like Lucas climb into the truck, and then his stuntman is hiding, and his stuntman then climbs up and does the dangerous climb up onto the roof, and then you have the vantage point of the stuntman, and then that person's going, and Job's going, and Carrie's going, kind of all at once. So it ended up being this big role play. So the actors we shot I think that whole 20-minute sequence in about 3.5 days, and it was a big role play. We would just hide, and it was exciting because it was so stripped down of all the all the lights had to be practical. Nothing, you were looking 360 in the whole space. That it reminded me of film school, and it reminded me of being out there with just a camcorder and coming up with these stories, because it was so intimate. And then the actors would come back, and we'd take the clips out, and we'd look at the footage in a computer and see what we missed. And what we quickly realized was that each actor had to be a camera operator. It's like I'm like, my head's looking at you, but if I glance over here, my head's still looking at you. So if I have a camera here, what we noticed is that people had to like unnaturally move their bodies. It's really designed for sports. These are all designed for sports. So to turn them into something you can use for cinema, you found out like, oh wow, like the actors all, like the first pass, everybody was like robots, trying to move their heads. And what we would do is we do 3 takes of every scene. And each actor was designated to be the operator of that particular take. And that person was in charge. Like you have Hoon, who plays Job, it's like, you got to make sure you're clocking that, you're clocking this, you're clocking this over here. So he would make sure he made very deliberate moves. Now, if you watched the other cameras watching him, he looked ridiculous, but he was in charge of filming the other actors. And then they would keep rotating and flipping, who was on point for those things. But it was great because you got right in the middle of a fight sequence. Like, what it feels like to be in a Banshee fight sequence now. You know what it feels like.
They're quite violent and they're intense.
Yeah, stunts had to recalibrate how, because there's a way that stage combat works, and that had to completely be rethought in order to work for a point of view camera like that. There was a music video that we pulled some inspiration from, but it was flawed in its own ability to create tension, and so we had to find a way to use the lensing to our advantage, and then very deliberately and specifically pull out of that sequence, which is where he's hallucinating, or we pick this other scene where we're introducing a new character to go out of that point of view. So every once in a while you drop out of it to kind of remind you of what you're looking at. And then I actually took the cameras out myself to see what that would be like. And that's where I came up with the idea, because I picked up my phone to take a selfie, and I'm like, oh cool, like I'm looking at me looking at this, and I put all these reflective surfaces in the sequence so that we could be reminded that the actors were doing stuff. So we added like her looking in a mirror, or he comes across, we made the safe vault shiny, or we put the access pad to be reflective, so you could see the actors were actually the ones operating. It wasn't any kind of trickery. So, the kind of modeling of that efficiency was it was a two, one of those twofers where you saved, we shot the sequence in half the time we normally would have taken, and we got a better sequence for it.
So you mentioned the efficiency and saving time, and that's something that, reading your biography on your website, something that was really interested in was the one olive philosophy, and I'm hoping you could explain that a little bit and talk about that, because that really ties into what you just described with how you chose to shoot the heist scene.
Yeah, there's, when you work in the industry long enough, or any industry, we all find, where as the machine grows, as productions grow, you find like where you're getting bogged down, and you see that, as you're gaining crew, which allows you to work quicker, you can feel the weight of either the company or the work, or things aren't moving as quickly as when I had, just my camera and could run around, which is why that sequence was so invigorating. So looking for ways to streamline my business, really came as I watched the corporations that started buying all the studios were forcing, budget cuts and so forth. So I was looking for proactive ways to save money, because I felt that, the way that my brand would work and the way that I would remain relevant was being fiscally responsible, but delivering quality. I think there's a tendency for directors to, just want what they want and ask for forgiveness later instead of asking for permission. I just felt like this is what I was given. This is my box. This is my box to work in. Now, if I stay in my box, I have full creative control and freedom of what I want to do. The second I get out of it, the phone calls, the everybody wondering about the money, it just becomes about something else, and I don't derive a lot of pleasure from that. So the One Olive was a story that, and I don't know where I'd heard it, but I had heard this story in the 80s where American Airlines had taken one olive out of their in-flight meals and had saved $40,000 that year by just removing one olive. So the idea being, can we remove something that no one will notice and yet still pick up savings, and how far can you go with that? So, that was something that I tried to look at within my business. What can I strip away that no one will notice, that won't affect the day, but it's just that little subtlety, whether it's, how can, and with my business, it's a game of minutes. So, we shoot for 12 hours, elapsed, it's about 14 hours because you have to get to work. You don't count lunch in terms of that time. You don't count the wrap out in terms of that time. So the crew often works longer than I do, but you're looking for ways to tighten that time and get more done, and wrapping early saves money, finding ways to work faster, getting more done, staying on schedule. All these things just keep adding up to more resources and more money. Now, that doesn't necessarily go into anybody's pocket, but it was a proactive way of working. So when budget cuts inevitably came for House, we were already right there and prepared to, we were already working that direction that year. So it was very easy for us to pivot. And now I try to build the shows looking for those efficiencies out of the gate, and they pick up in small ways because everything starts adding up. And I think that's what everybody left each show each year feeling like, oh wow, like, getting rid of paper, not making every copy of the script. We work all electronically now. We distribute all the footage, online, so that it's you're not printing DVDs and messengering those DVDs around town. So all that labor, all that extra time, things are picking up quicker, and the money you're saving by not doing reams of paper. The scripts are sent by email. We stopped distributing paper call sheets on Quarry. So everybody likes to claim you're saving the environment, but really you're just making the show pick up those few $100s a day that you're spending on paper and printing, and guy to come out and fix the copier and the ink and all those kind of things. Like, all those little things add up to what amounts to like a day of shooting. A day of shooting is 7 or 8 minutes of show that you can go pick up. So it just kept snowballing from there, and it's I wrote an article about it. I've been asked to write a book about it. I'm just trying to and those little stories are all over the place, and it's fun when I have an eye for those, and I pick them up, or I save articles that I read, where I see other people starting to catch on that, oh wow, like if pilots aren't flying with their giant manuals, then they use iPads instead. That much less weight saves that much more fuel, which puts back this many millions of dollars back into the company. So it's an interesting way of looking at things, and it was just a way that I wanted people to start looking at our business, because there's a tendency of people not being able to keep track of where all the money's going.
And to transition to the final season of Banshee, this is the 4th season. What made this feel right this was the season to kind of wrap things up?
we'd always talked about Jonathan Tropper, who co-created Banshee. We knew the premise was finite. So, for people that haven't seen Banshee, we knew the premise of a guy impersonating the sheriff would ultimately, had seams on it that would split at some point. That's part of the fun of it, is like, who's going to find that out, or how is that going to unfold?
It's remarkable. It's kind of he's been able to stay in the position he's in this long without.
Well, if you look at the timeline of the show hasn't even taken place over one story year.
Sure.
So it seems longer because the show is on for so many years.
Right, as you mentioned, right.
But the first 3 seasons pick up where we left off. Season 4 will jump ahead a bit. In terms of where we leave things in season 3. So a lot of those threads will get dealt with, but we wanted to subvert that in a way that people didn't see coming. Part of what I think attracted us to Banshee, because Jonathan Tropper and I are the same age, we grew up on the same genre films and wanted to be able to turn that on its head. So the way that we get out of the premise and where that leaves the town is really what season 4 is about. Season 4 will be 8 episodes, because the model, one of the other exciting things of television is the model keeps shifting. So now the kind of new pay cable model is 8 episodes over 10, which was down from 13. So it's so season 4, we had outlined kind of like what the seasons could be about, and then when we got to season 4, 2 things happened. We had to move from North Carolina, where we were shooting. One of the things that drives television is chasing these tax incentives, which are stronger in different states. Massachusetts has one. New Orleans, Atlanta, which is really growing, all have them. So North Carolina lost theirs, and it made it financially impossible for us to stay, because we recoup nearly 30% of what we spend. So we infuse the community, and it's sad when it goes away, because it really does. When we're there, we do spend, we hire. There's a lot of invisible costs of the restaurants we eat at, and the movies we see, and the things we go do. And when we moved the show to Pennsylvania, it required kind of a reboot, which sort of pushed it ahead one more year. And it seemed right. We all talked it out, and we made sure we were thorough about it, but being able to end it on our own terms was really important. And the show builds to its proper conclusion. The show wasn't canceled. It was a very deliberate choice to end it, and that choice is reflected in the season. So people are going to come to the end of the story, and Jonathan, being a novelist, really felt that every story has a beginning, middle, and end, and he wanted to make sure it actually ended for all the time that people had given the show.
And I know you can't spoil it, certainly, but what can you tell us about season 4?
Season 4 will take a small jump in time, and every thread that you saw at the end of season 3, for people that haven't watched the show, without giving too much away about how season 3 ended, all those things will get dealt with. They'll get dealt with on their own time. And I think I can honestly say that anybody who loves the show will not believe the first 5 minutes of what the show will be, because they will not have any ability to see it coming. So we stay true to all the surprise storytelling, and yet with all the character poetry, and I think it'll be a great season.
Looking forward to it. I know that I've talked with Fred about this. My only complaint about the show is you kill off too many of the attractive female characters.
Yeah, it's but we're equal opportunity in terms of who we kill off.
That is true.
The men and the women both get it, and I think that's the thing that we try to do, is that the women give as good as they get. They can kick ass, and they're strong female characters, but at the same time, you kind of live by the sword, die by the sword. It doesn't discriminate. And we had an episode in season 2 called Evil for Evil, and that really carried into the effects of that episode, rippled all the way through it into the end of the 3rd season. So it's, we take violence seriously, and we take the actions of what you're doing, and that everybody that wants to kind of engage in that world, may pay the consequence. Whether it's, and for Hood, anybody that gets in his radar is really becomes, their life becomes in jeopardy, because it's, Brock says, it's like everything you touch turns to blood. Right. And that's...
Yeah, I mean, for somebody who is, I wouldn't call him evil, but he's certainly violent, and he's a criminal. You feel a lot of sympathy for him. He certainly is a multi-dimensional character.
For Hood?
For Hood, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, more so than a Kai Proctor, who I would say is a little bit more towards the evil.
Yeah, but he humanized that character, I think,
When
nicely.
his mother was dying.
And
yes.
that was, those were, his conflict. He's shunned from his community. We have all felt out of place. I mean, he is taking it to an extreme, no doubt. Hood, was stuck in a moment in time. 15 years ago, he was arrested as a young man. You're not going to evolve in prison. You're not going to grow as a person. So he's kind of doing all his growing at once, and that's interesting to watch. And I think that's partly what humanizes Lucas Hood. But yeah, killing the characters is never easy. You see some of the characters, some of the actors are game. They can't wait to find out how they're going to get it. Other ones, it's a slow burn, or they don't want to go. And you try to always do what's right for the show. You can't. If you start letting your personal feelings of how you feel about the person who's playing the character, it'll start clouding. And I've seen a lot of shows let that judgment cloud them, and we really tried to commit to it that it's what's right for the story, and it's where the story is kind of guiding us. And yes, it's true we could avoid this, but this is where it's pushing. So then people will feel the unnatural act of, we killed the mayor in season 1, and that came at the last minute because he was stinking up the place, and it was a very easy decision, but the audience felt like, wait a second, why did you guys do that? Like, it sort of felt like you're going over here, but it was a very last minute thing that came in from the network, and we had to accommodate it, but it wasn't organic, and the audience felt it. So we really try to go where the story is organically going, and make sure that the fans either don't see it coming, or when it does, it's dealt with and it ripples out. So you'll still feel the effects of deaths from season 3 well into season 4.
And moving on from Banshee, your next project, Quarry. Now that's also going to be on Cinemax?
Yeah, that's for Cinemax too.
So that's down, you were filming in New Orleans. Is it set there?
No. Quarry is based on these Max Allan Collins novels by the same name. And the series is kind of a prequel to the books.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about that.
Quarry is about a Vietnam vet returning home that has been involved in kind of a scandal similar like the My Lai massacre. He was acquitted, but the cloud of what happened still carries. And as especially learning, because I didn't live it, the way these vets came home and the difficulties they came home to, and the strong, how polarized the country was about the war, and how things were taken out on these soldiers, returning. Now soldiers return home heroes, but they weren't returning home, considered heroes. And he can't get a job, he can't get back into society. He, had relevance and was somebody when he was over in war, but he can't connect. And again, through a series of circumstances, he's recruited by the Dixie Mafia to become a hitman. So the show takes place in 1972 Memphis, which doesn't exist in Memphis anymore, which we had to start scouting the country looking for, which we found in New Orleans. So we did go to Memphis for a little bit because Memphis has a rich music history, all of which comes into play. Finding these local bands to, pick up these old songs that people may be familiar with, maybe not. We have a real B-side approach to the music on Quarry. And it also is the tearing apart of a marriage. When you start living a double life, what is the impact of that? What's the world you're getting involved in? When you start looking towards that world, where does it take you? And then what is it appealing to? So the show deals with Vietnam as well. We go to Vietnam within the show, which is, I'm really one of the first filmmakers of my generation to tackle Vietnam. And all of us were making something we didn't live, so the amount of research that went into it was enormous. So it was exciting to feel we got that right. We had a Vietnam vet that was one of our consultants that really stood with us to kind of be our eyes of authenticity. So it was a show that was very grounded. It's 180 degrees difference from Banshee, but Quarry still appeals to the same, they are pulp crime novels, so there is that element of it that's within there, but I did it in a much more kind of grounded and more observed approach, so that it would kind of draw you into the characters in a different way.
Now, when's this debuting?
It'll come on in 2016. It's undetermined exactly when Quarry will be coming on, but it'll be coming on in 2016.
Great. I look forward to seeing it. So before we wrap up, I would just like to ask Fred and then Greg for just some advice, and Fred, from a parental standpoint, parents seeing their kids pursue their dreams, advice that you could give to parents in a kind of allowing that process, seeing that process through, of having your, fostering an environment that allows your child to be able to pursue what he or she wants to do.
Wow. Interesting question, Jeff. So thank you for that. And let me see if I can sort of summarize this with all three of my children are all self-employed. And I take a lot of pride in that because I'm self-employed, and my father was self-employed and his father was self-employed. I think that genetics have a lot to do with this. And I take a lot of pride in that. So our history, family-wise, when my grandparents came over here in the early 1900s, without speaking the language, literally, and not knowing anything except that in America the streets are paved with gold. And they literally set a new life. And so Greg, being the fourth generation from that particular element, makes it, he's pursuing his dream in a way that there's high risk. One of the things that I guess I did was, it's actually a multifaceted answer. As a former high school teacher, I was very sensitive to, and my minor in college also was psychology. And so one of the things that I always was fascinated by was the way that I could relate to kids. And I only wanted to teach high school, and I wanted to make sure that my relationships with kids was designed to enhance their ability to move on in life and to be able to take risks. And one of the things that I did with my own kids was I think I encouraged them to be willing to take risks, and that the fallback of it would be, that's okay, it's a learning experience, you'll move forward. The other thing that I tried to do was, among the things that I tried to do as a father, was to learn as much as I could about parenting, because we really don't know a lot about parenting. We think we do, and then we sort of take the model of our parents and go, well, I guess I didn't like this, I did like this, and so forth. And one of the things that I did was, I read an interesting book entitled A More Productive Child, A More Productive Child. And what they did is they profiled freshmen at MIT, and they said, okay, what were the three things that allowed you to succeed at the level that you're now in one of the top schools, universities in the world? And what they found was that from the cross-section of that, there were three things that was the commonality of all those kids, which was their parents all had a kind word, a smile, and a hug. Now this is kind of crazy. A smile, a kind word, a smile, and a hug. And so one of the things I did with my children was I told them I loved them all the time. I hugged them, and even when they were growing up, they said, why do you keep hugging me? I'm going, because I need to, and I'm always going to do it, so don't ask me to stop it. And these are the things that, that I always wanted to do. And I'm not sure that that was the reason, but I think that when you take a look at raising your kids, allowing them to, like they had all been to Europe before I was there, because I encouraged them to do it. They did it and they loved it. And then they got this freedom of travel and the opportunity to take risks and know that they'd be fine. And they had the ability to do that, which I encouraged. And I think that a lot of that has paid off to where they are today. So I'm not saying that what I did was right. I think it worked out well, that all three of my kids are doing what they love to do. They're all self-employed and they're all successful at it. And when you look back on that, I don't know if I could have done anything else. It just worked out really well for them. So I guess that's the quick version of what I would encourage the people to do out there. Have high expectations for them, knowing that it's safe, knowing that they can always come home, but taking risks are with everything. If you get too conservative and you keep your kids down and you just keep pushing them down and pushing them down, they don't have the ability to grow and want to grow. So my thinking is just encourage them to take risks and be willing to take those things. And I think that they'll end up successful.
Well, thank you. And
I definitely carried that into my own parenting, because I have 3 kids now, and it's, I watch kind of helicopter parenting, take over now, and it's the fact that we were encouraged to be independent, and it was a no-brainer when I left Boston to go to California at 18. Like, it was just like, oh, okay, now I'm on my own. I had gone overseas. I had been kind of pushed out of the house enough. I mean, whether not against my will, but definitely it was like they knew what was good for me that way, and I think that independence gave me a certain amount of self-sufficiency. So I wasn't putting energy into how do I cook for myself? How do I wash my clothes? Like, I knew how to do all that when I left to go to California. I mean, I was interested in film. It was a hobby that became a passion, which became a career. And so, when I was in public access, it was important that nobody was discouraging of the idea that I wanted to go to California and pursue, at the time I wanted to pursue film. I quickly found that the film industry was really broken, and I couldn't ever quite get my arms around how it worked. It was too unpredictable, which is I talked about why I got into television in the first place.
Right.
Was that like the consistent need for content? Like, wow, the shows come on every September. Like, they need stuff. They can't mess around. Like, nobody knows. I mean, you guys don't know like how many movies are like I don't even know like what goes and then what dies because this exec changes. So I wanted a certain amount of stability in an unstable business. But when I was starting out, it was, I mean, now what's exciting, and this was something that House helped pioneer, which was the use of all the small format cameras like the 5D, like the GoPro. The technology's in everybody's hands, so it's harder to kind of make your mark to get seen and get out there. But at the same time, you have so much available that I didn't have. You can upload your thing to YouTube, you can email it around, you can link it, it's just like that ability to self-distribute your own work is so exciting. Like if I had grown up with DVD commentaries, if those were available, if the technology like this was acceptable, like it would have been a thrilling time to do that. I mean, I would say, if people are looking to get into the industry, there's an enormous amount of information out there. Like, we use the Banshee DVDs as TV school. So, I've taken it very seriously that each season of Banshee really talks about, if you listen to the commentaries of those shows, of our shows, it's all like, it's from the sound people, it's from the stunt people, it's from all sides of production so that you can try to learn. I try to archive how we made the show, not just what we made. And, and I feel this need to sort of pass that on or sort of teach that forward as kind of broadly as I can. It's not, there's no right way to get into the business. I certainly was, I had one way, and it was a very slow and steady way of working. It was a certain perseverance of, like, I'm going to keep at this, And I don't know, I never sort of felt discouraged, but along the way, taking that risk, it was a disappointment to the older generations of my family because they didn't understand it. There was this expectation that I was going to be one of my dad was really one of the few people that went to college in the family, and there was this expectation this was going to be the doctor, lawyer generation. And, really, my brother and my sister and I, like, none of us really took to traditional education of school the way that it was. I used school as a way to continue to, like, hone my craft. And I was interested in what I was interested in, which was psych and which was a few other, studies. But being okay not having to be like the perfect student, but being passionate about what you're learning and constantly trying to make things. Now there's no excuse for people not to be out there every weekend making their stuff, like just learning and making mistakes and seeing how the craft works and trying to learn about actors, reading, there's so much available now. There's books about how to direct, how to act, all these things are so good because they're written by the people that have phenomenal careers. I wish I had the time I had when I was in college because none of that was available, and I miss being able to have like fed my mind even further on it because it's there. Really the kind of moving past the discouragement. A lot of people that never pursued their own dreams will just try to. I'd say 90% of the people I came up against were just people that didn't take their own chances and felt that they were going to kind of do whatever they could to sort of make everybody else sort of, misery loves company, as they say, and that is sadly out there more than people think. And I just was like, all right, like that person wasn't for me, this thing wasn't for me, and I kind of could brush that stuff off. And when you kind of grow up and you build sort of a thick skin through your childhood, you're able to like let that stuff roll off you and just keep your eye on the prize, which is what I was doing every year. And it took 10 years to become an overnight success, as they say. So.
Well, I really appreciate the time. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Fred, for joining me today. I want to thank our behind-the-scenes crew, Alex Barros and Gina Coe. Thank you very much for your help. And again, Greg and Fred Yaitanes, thank you for joining me on this edition of Stoughton Spotlight. Once again, I'm Jeffrey Pickett. Thank you for tuning in.